The Ant King Meruem, easily the strongest character to have ever been featured in Hunter x Hunter. At face value, he is nigh on perfect and an impossible task to overcome. However, even with those overwhelming odds, defeating Meruem is much more achievable than you might think. Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and today we are back with some glorious Hunter x Hunter in order to examine one of the more enduring questions left lingering by Togashi's media beast, which is there anyone in Hunter x Hunter who can actually defeat Meruem? Not exactly an original video topic, but also one that I've never really seen a good answer to. Whenever this question gets asked, it is immediately derailed by almost 100% pure speculation and headcanon. Example, there is a video out there by Nenmak called 5 People Who Can Kill Meruem, and not a single one of those 5 choices are grounded in any kind of evidence. And I don't mean to call Nenmak out or anything, I have nothing against the guy, it's just that out of all of the characters who can defeat Meruem videos, his happens to be by far the most viewed. So in this video, not only am I going to provide you with 5 characters who can defeat or even kill Meruem, we're also going to go over the choices in that video and discuss why they might not have been the best. Before we begin, here's a little warning though. Yes, there are 5 characters who can beat Meruem, but these are not going to be the sexy answers you might be expecting. For example, I'm not going to throw Ging Freecss into the mix and go, yes, Ging is like the strongest of the Nen dudes and he will duel Meruem in this epic 1v1 that will shatter the very world, because that's just not how Hunter x Hunter works. You know how Hunter x Hunter does work? Painfully constructed Nen technicalities. That is the lifeblood of this series. There is no character in Hunter x Hunter who is outright immune to everything, not even the Ant King. Nor am I saying that the characters who could defeat him are guaranteed to do so. I'm just saying that under the right circumstances, however unlikely those may be, they do have a win condition. Meanwhile, your win condition would be to hit the subscribe button for the New World Review, thus activating an ability allowing you to receive regular injections of Hunter x Hunter content administered straight into your YouTube feed. It's a very handy power that you will need going forward, so I'd highly recommend not neglecting this gorgeous, gorgeous red button. But let's begin with an obvious one as an example. The first character who can beat and or kill Meruem is obviously Alluka. More accurately, Nanika, I suppose, but it's much of a muchness. Wish granting though is undisputedly the most powerful ability within the entire series because it does hold quite literally infinite potential, especially when wielded by a certain Killua. But even without Killua, all a person needs to do is make the very simple wish, something along the lines of, kill the Ant King Meruem, and that will be done without question and with a delightful I. Now the cost that's going to be incurred as a result of making that wish is going to be pretty pure insanity, and it may even result in the bulk of humanity being killed when the next person fails to fulfill Alluka's requests. But we're not concerned with that for this discussion. What's worse though is that there isn't a single thing that Meruem could do about it. This child on the other side of the world could just take him out in the blink of an eye. And this does also make quite a bit of sense given that Nanika is also a creature of the Dark Continent and its threat level was even classified as an A, whilst the entire colony of Chimera ants, including Meruem, were curiously only classified as a B. So there we go, that's the easy character done. Switching up into debunk mode now, one of the characters featured in Nenmak's video and one that always comes up in online forum discussion as well is Ging Freecss. There is an absolutely stunning assumption made by fans that Ging, in a process that I can only describe as somehow, could take on and even defeat Meruem. This is because he is quite possibly one of the greatest human Nen geniuses in existence, and he has even been referred to as one of the 5 best Nen users in the world, specifically by Netero. Specifically by Netero before meeting Meruem and the rest of the ants, I suppose. But the thing is that Ging is a question mark character. Just knowing what we do about him is not enough to say that he could conclusively beat or kill Meruem. Firstly, because the pinnacle of human standards of Nen use were barely enough to, scratch Meruem. And secondly, because we don't know Jing's abilities. We do know that he's talented enough to replicate very basic abilities of others, but he would need to have something pretty special to stack up against Meruem, which he may have. I'm not saying it's completely impossible, but with all of the available evidence, Ging currently does not possess a win condition for this matchup, and any further discussion is raw speculation at best. Although I will say if we did need to place a blind bet on one of these question mark characters, he would probably be the best one. Now for the next character who can actually kill Meruem, it is manga time now, because here we have second prince Camilla of the Kakin Empire. And she has a very nasty ability that I've covered a fair bit on this channel because it always seems to pop up and be relevant, but it's called Cat's Name and it is a counteractive Hatsu that only activates in the event that Camilla is killed. But upon meeting that morbid requirement, a big old Nen kitty appears and transfers the life energy of the killer back into Camilla, which is a fun rhyme, but thus resulting in the death of said killer and the life of said Camilla. So it's slightly more complicated because it does require Meruem to actually kill Camilla, which is, well, it's more or less likely depending on where we find Meruem in his lifespan. Early Meruem would probably murder her without question, whereas post-Rose Meruem seems much more unlikely to do so. So it's a very tough question, but the point is more that it is definitely possible. It's another instant win condition against the most powerful character to have ever existed in the series, all based on a fun Nen technicality, one that is extraordinarily difficult to anticipate as well. This is one of those situations where the inexperience of the ants would pretty much instantly do most of them. Like the squadron leaders and the royal guard, they would never see this coming in a million years. Meruem, I suppose, is much more perceptive than they are, but that depends entirely on which of the 40 days of his life that we catch him. And even then, it is still undeniably possible for Camilla to pull this off. To hop back aboard the debunk train now, choo-choo, another character that gets brought up painfully often in these discussions is Maha Zoldyck, who may or may not also be Zig Zoldyck. It's very confusing. I've made a whole video about it, which you should absolutely check out here. But Maha also gets brought up a fair bit because he is, or at least he was, implied to be on a combative level on par or even greater than that of Isaac Netero. Netero is actually stated by Xeno Zoldyck to have been the only person to face off against Maha and live to tell the tale. So we are looking at some pretty serious power behind this pretty shriveled prune. But this is even worse than the Ging situation, because in Maha's case, we don't have a single shred of evidence regarding his Nen abilities, and you know, at least Ging, well, he's done something that we can latch onto. But in addition to that, Maha is clearly no longer in his prime either, and the only way he could stack up against Meruem is through a highly favorable ability like Cat's Name or Wish Granting, which we simply cannot just go ahead and assume he has. Sometimes the greatest and most powerful figures in this series don't have the right utility at their disposal, and in fact, the more powerful the character is, the less likely these weird technical advantages are to pop up, because the stunningly powerful aura users, they just don't generally need them. Netero being a prime example of that. So Maha is, he exists, I guess, but you cannot in good faith say much more about him than that, least of all that he could beat or kill Meruem. As for someone who could, let's head back into Manga Town and say hi to a character who very few people probably realize even exists, and it is Rihan. He has a very dangerous ability called Predator, which manifests into another instant win condition by implanting the quote Predator inside the body of a target, which then grows and theoretically evolves into the natural predator of whatever the target is. However, the problem being that this evolution is assisted by how much Rihan is able to learn about the target in question. So I'll say this right here and now. In a straight up combat scenario, Rihan has a 0% chance of unleashing the predator and having enough time and opportunity for it to learn to grow to the point of countering Meruem. It would need to be a much more long-term, long-distance project, but what does go in Predator's favor is that it's actually incredibly weak against users who have multiple Nen abilities, mostly because it just takes longer to learn what they are. And for example, that's why Rihan decided it was a very bad matchup against Kurapika, who has roughly a billion different Hatsu, whereas Meruem, on the other hand, for most of the series did not possess a single Nen ability, and he only ever developed one original Hatsu, so that does make Rihan's job incredibly straightforward in a way, because to be perfectly frank, there isn't much to learn about Meruem, other than he's a big, strong dude bruh with only basic Nen functionality. So fulfilling the conditions of Predator are not entirely inconceivable. And look, it's a long shot, it's a massive long shot actually, and 999 times out of 1,000, I don't think that this is going to work, but it is definitely possible. Which, weirdly enough, is more than I can solidly say for Ging, Maha, or our third character to debunk, being Pariston Hill. Once again, Pariston is a complete question mark. Conceivably, he could have a sneaky ability that would catch Meruem off guard, because Pariston is indeed a sneaky rat man. However, we know even less about Pariston than we do of Ging. We've not even seen Pariston invoke Nen in the series beyond producing a simple Ren to intimidate Cheadle and to sort of menacingly greet Ging. And really, if you were going to argue for Pariston, then I don't see why you wouldn't throw in like half of the other Zodiacs as well, because you'd be making the exact same argument either way. Like, why are we choosing Pariston over, say, Botabai, who we also know nothing about, except that he's apparently good enough at something to have risen to this rank? And I suppose the most unfortunate thing with Pariston is that his greatest asset shown thus far is his genius level intellect, something that Meruem can match and even surpass without issue. So there's not a ton to grab onto with Pariston in this discussion, it's just a whole lot of pure speculation. And while we're here, let's also do Gon. Now, Nenmak didn't use Gon or Adult Gon in his video, but plenty of others do, and it's all due to a misconception in the anime where Pito states that Gon's power is now equal to that of the Ging. And this is one of those very controversial choices that the anime made, because it doesn't reflect what Pito actually stated in the manga, which is that his fangs may sink into the king, thus highlighting Gon as a potential danger, but certainly not an equal. But the thing is, even if Adult Gon was equal in power, he would still will not be able to defeat Meruem, and if you'd like a more detailed explanation as to why, I have a whole video on this topic ready for you right about here. Now, as for the fourth character who could kill Meruem, here's where we're going to get quite annoyingly technical, because let's all say hello to Knov. And Knov is here because, unlike the question mark characters, we do know for a fact that he has a power capable of beating Meruem, even if his mental state would never give him the courage to, actually use it. Knov's hide and seek as well as scream are two of the most underrated Nen abilities in the series, and in fact scream can one-shot anyone or anything that Knov successfully makes contact with, because the whole aspect of teleportation into a pocket dimension bypasses any and all defenses, be it Nen based or simply a tough anti-exterior. The big issue is, would Knov ever be able to land scream on Meruem? And that is highly unlikely. It would have to be a very convoluted scenario, like Knov teaming up with Meliaron and using scream in tandem with God's accomplice. Something along those lines could work. But to be completely honest, the scenario I find much more likely to play out is Knov just walking up to Meruem and saying, "Hey, follow me," then opening up a portal with hide and seek. Fearless Meruem then wanders into the pocket dimension, where Knov seals him in a specific room, once again taking advantage of Meruem's inexperience and confidence bordering on arrogance, which definitely did happen when he was happy to walk into Netero's trap, so there's a pretty strong precedent for Meruem just going along with what his opponents want to do. And while both of these scenarios are still nigh on impossible to achieve, primarily I'd say due to Knov's mental state more so than anything Meruem does, they are still genuine possibilities to kill, trap, or defeat Meruem. Meanwhile, next on the debunk list is the currently manga exclusive character Beyond Netero. As the name implies, he is the son of Isaac Netero, and as the name also implies, he may very well be more powerful than his father. Other than that, we know sweet FA about Beyond. He's a clever boy, I suppose, having orchestrated this whole Dark Continent arc, but there's no way that anyone could honestly state that Beyond could pull this off without a whole ton of caveats such as, in my opinion, Beyond is probably maybe strong and smart enough to have crafted an ability to deal with a god like Ant, maybe. Putting this character in this situation and claiming that you have an outcome just goes beyond any reasonable thought. And before I reveal the final character who could beat Meruem, let's also tackle Chrollo. He's always a tricky one because the argument in his favor is that generally, with enough planning time, Chrollo could pull off anything. And maybe he can, but I still think it's a pretty extreme stretch to throw him in against Meruem even with planning time, and let's be clear, that time is not infinite. Meruem was only alive for 40 days, so let's say that's Chrollo's maximum. In that time, he needs to understand Meruem, his capabilities, and prepare a full counter. And to put that into some perspective, Chrollo was running around and planning for almost an entire year just to be able to counter Hisoka and Bunjigun. And Meruem is a significantly taller order, but with that said, there is one way that Chrollo could conceivably do it, which would see him borrow the Nen ability of our final character who could technically beat Meruem, which is Phinks Magub. And straight away I need to say that this is by far the most unlikely of the 5 characters I've mentioned to actually succeed in dispatching the Ant King, but thanks to fun technical Nen stuff, it is still possible. Phinks' Hatsu, the Ripper Cyclotron, holds theoretically infinite power. It's a very simple thing. With every time that Phinks winds his arm clockwise, his aura increases, and thus the power of his eventual punch becomes stronger, with 15 rotations being more than enough to decimate a basic Chimera Ant. Not a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, and it really does make you wonder what hundreds, perhaps even thousands of rotations could generate. The biggest problem being how wildly impractical it would be to achieve. I have no idea how long it would take, and Meruem he's very unlikely to just, stand there and let it happen. So in the hypothetical scenario where it does work, Phinks would need to charge the Ripper Cyclotron beforehand. And there is also a very fair question to examine, being that does the Ripper Cyclotron have a limit? Because some have speculated that it cannot go beyond Phinks' maximum aura output, which I find to be highly unlikely, because if that were the case, then this would be one of the worst enhancement abilities within the entire series, because characters like Gon or Ging can just flood their full aura into their fists without the tedious task of rotating their arms like a gazillion times. But it does make sense with what we know of Nen. The rotations are the cost, the bonus aura is the output. It might come to a point where the rotations start providing diminishing returns on investment, but they will be returns nonetheless, and with how the ability is explained to us, there will come a point where the Ripper Cyclotron is strong enough to one-shot even Meruem. I don't know where that point is, potentially hundreds of thousands, perhaps even a million rotations maybe, but it does theoretically exist, which once again is more than we can say for the Jings, the Mahas, the Paristons, and even the Beyond Neteros of the world. But if you'd like to explore some more Hunter x Hunter fun, then please do check out this video ranking the 20 best Nen abilities in the series. Plenty of crazy stuff to examine, so I look forward to seeing you there.